Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the Saints Insider Postgame Show. It's week 18. I'm Zach Ewing. We're here live at the Caesars Superdome. We've got some good news, some more good news, and some bad news. The Saints crushed the Atlanta Falcons 48-17, outscore them 31-0 in the second half. Look as good as they have all year long. Those are your double dose of good news. This team, the last couple of weeks, honestly looked like a playoff team. Looked as good as they have all season long. Crushed their rivals in a couple of games that we had circled as huge games down the stretch at Tampa Bay last week, here at home against the Atlanta Falcons this week, and the Saints played their two best games of the year, beat both of them. The bad news, of course, they did not get the help that they needed, the Saints did not, from the Carolina Panthers, who lose 9-0 today to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and give the Bucs the NFC South title. Bucs and Saints both finishing the year at 9-8. They were both 4-2 in the division. However, the Bucs have a better record versus common opponents. That's the next tiebreaker. And so the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are the NFC South champions for the third consecutive season. One small bit of good news, or a light at the end of the tunnel, of course, games that just kicked off at 3:25, Saints still have a chance. They need two things to happen to sneak into the playoffs. They would need both the Arizona Cardinals to beat the Seattle Seahawks and the Chicago Bears to go to Green Bay and beat the Packers. If both of those things happen, both of those teams are underdogs, so it would be a pretty unlikely scenario at this point, but the Saints could still get in to the playoffs as the number 7 seed. One way or another, this is the last game at the Superdome for this season. If the Saints get in, that'd be the number 7 seed. They'd be on the road in any playoff game they played. And so this is the last game at the Superdome. Saints come up just short in that quest for the NFC South title. And that leads me to asking, what do you think about this season? Saints obviously looked very good. Derek Carr looked very good today. He threw for 4 touchdown passes. Last 2 weeks, 6 touchdowns, no interceptions for Carr. Defense played really well outside of a couple of coverage busts today, both today and last week. Teams seemed to kind of put it all together. They won 4 of their last 5, but they started 5-7. They put themselves in a position where they would need these sort of things to happen. And even though they kind of took care of what we thought they would need to take care of, they didn't get the help they needed ultimately, and now look like they'll be at home for the playoffs for a third straight season. So how are you feeling about it? We want your comments. We'll take your questions. We'll show them live here on the air on the Saints Insider Postgame Show. We will also have visits in a little while from our Saints Insider crew. Jeff Duncan, Rod Walker, Luke Johnson, Matthew Paris, all in the Saints locker room or at the press conference right now, and they will join me here shortly to talk about what the Saints are saying. Stefan, if we get in, we're hot. Yeah, that's true. I don't know that the Saints are a team you want to play right now. The most likely scenario is if they get in, they'd be going to Dallas. And Dallas has been really, really good at home. They're undefeated at home this year. They went 8-0 at AT&T Stadium. They blew out some teams, so that would be a really tough matchup for the Saints. But yeah, they're playing well. They feel good about themselves. Turbo after the bet on the Bears and Cardinals. Yeah, look, I think you want to get into the playoffs. I know that, I think that haven't looked exactly at the draft pick scenario, but it would be like you'd fall from maybe the 15th pick to like the 19th pick if you got in the playoffs and lost. So that might cost you a little bit. But yeah, anytime you get in the playoffs, and look, the Saints, between their aging roster, between their salary cap issues, you don't know the next time it might happen. It could happen next year. It could happen this afternoon. But I think you got to root for it whenever you get a chance to do that. Stefan, how much do you think was getting comfortable with the team and how much was Carr's injuries affecting this season? Maybe both. I think Carr definitely got more comfortable as the season went on. I also think the play calling maybe got better around him, gave him things that he was more comfortable with. He obviously increased communication, improved his relationship with Chris Olave specifically, also hit the tight ends more, that sort of thing. But I think you're right, Stefan, and also that the injuries, like, look, if you take out the 3 games Carr played after he got hurt in the previous game, so we're talking about the Bucs game here at home in week 4, the week after he got hurt in Green Bay. We're talking about the Falcons game after the bye. He had been hurt before the bye in Minnesota. And then we're talking about the Carolina game here after he got hurt against Detroit. The Saints actually won that one. But if you take out those 3 games, Carr has pretty darn good numbers in the other 14 games. Now, I understand you can't do that. I mean, every quarterback plays hurt from time to time. And so you don't just get to make that excuse for Carr. Those stats count too, but his numbers ended up being okay anyway. If you look at the full season numbers, we'll talk about those a little bit later. But yeah, at the end of the year, the guy's playing like a playoff quarterback, and will be an asset for the Saints if they do sneak in. Yeah, let's see what else we got. Why do we wait all year to play well? Too little, too late. Yeah, I mean that's the story of this. You can play the old Jim Mora game, the coulda, woulda, shoulda, with a lot of different games this year. I think Ryan says, 17-0 at Green Bay. That is example numero uno right there. That is Exhibit A. 17-0 lead at the start of the fourth quarter. The Saints end up losing 18-17. Blake Grupe misses a field goal that could have put them back on top with a little less than a minute to go. They win that one. They just clinched a playoff spot. In fact, they win that one. They just clinched the NFC South because they'd be 10-7 and have passed the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So any other game, the first game in Atlanta, Saints lost 24-15, but that was a game where they were marching up and down the field on the Falcons, could not score once they got in the red zone. 5 red zone trips. They had, I think, 3 field goals, a fumble, and a pick 6. So they outscored the Falcons 9-7 on their 5 trips to the red zone. Lost that game. Lost the game at Houston where they had 3 chances inside the 30 at the end of the game to tie the game or take the lead. Jacksonville here fell behind way early. Detroit here fell behind way early. Made valiant charges in those games and couldn't come up with it. Foster Moreau drops a pass that could have forced overtime or maybe even given the Saints a chance to win with a 2-point conversion in that game against Jacksonville. So there's a lot of coulda, woulda, shouldas. But bottom line, like every NFL team has coulda, woulda, shouldas. Every NFL team, except for the really, really good ones who go 15-2 and 14-3, they have games that got away, and you have to be good enough to overcome that. Ultimately, the Saints, it looks like they're not. Ryan says don't deserve the playoffs. Yeah. Chris says who dat? Like the Saints look good today, man. They really did. 48-17 over the Falcons. We'll talk more about that one. Game was 17-17 at halftime. Saints on defense gave up a couple of huge plays early, which really made it look like the Falcons would be in this thing to the end. But defense locks down in the second half. 3 takeaways in the second half. Derek Carr going crazy. His receivers going even crazier in the second half. Unbelievable catch right here behind me by Chris Olave, tipping the pass to himself for a touchdown. Rashid Shaheed made a nice touchdown catch. A.T. Perry made an unbelievable catch to get the Saints out from their own 4-yard line. He caught 2 touchdown passes, the rookie. Kendra Miller, the rookie, had a good day running the ball, 73 yards on the ground and a touchdown, his first career touchdown. So lots of good things to go around today. And we will talk about those as well. We'll recap this one. We'll keep an eye on that scoreboard. Want to let you know, first of all, that this season's postgame coverage is brought to you by Tulane Doctors. When it comes to healthcare, choose a partner that sets the standard. Tulane Doctors are bringing the medicine of tomorrow to the Gulf South today. Find your physician at TulaneDoctors.com. With that said, we'll take our first break here on the Saints Insider Postgame Show. We'll be back. We'll recap this one, take our first look at that wild card scoreboard as we await visits from the Saints Insider crew coming from the locker room. Be back right after this.
We are Tulane Doctors. Physicians and scientists working side by side to advance academic medicine. We give our community access to the best possible medical remedies, developing state-of-the-art treatments to improve quality of life, address public health crises, and cure disease. All in passionate pursuit of our mission to provide inspired patient care for generations to come. Tulane Doctors. The future of medicine is here.
The Times-Picayune always gets it right. Jay's on top.
Not quite. It says here the Crusaders are the best.
I think you mean the Greenies, buddy.
These sports writers know what's up.
At least you're wearing the right colors, but we know why people read the paper. The one thing we can all agree on, we trust the Times-Picayune.
Subscribe today. Read it today. Trust it today. The Times-Picayune.
You're never going to make the front page wearing that.
Welcome back to the Saints Insider Postgame Show live from the Caesars Superdome. Zach Ewing with you here live from the Dome floor. Waiting visits from Luke Johnson, Matthew Paris, our Saints beat writers for the Times-Picayune. Also our columnists, Rod Walker and Jeff Duncan, will be with me after they visit with the Saints and give their takes on what happened. Also, we'll get to talk to Jeff about a kind of a controversial column he wrote this morning saying the Saints should move on from Michael Thomas and Marshawn Lattimore. I think a lot of people are surprised by Michael Thomas. It looks like it's just not going to work out here. He missed the last 6 games of the season injured. Marshawn Lattimore may be a little bit more of a surprise that Jeff would suggest that, but that is what he's saying. That's what Jeff said. So we'll talk to him about that as well as we go into a possible off season here. On that note, couple checks of the scoreboard. It is the Chicago Bears with an early 3-0 lead on the Green Bay Packers in Green Bay. But the Packers do have the ball in the Bears red zone. So it looks like they're at least going to tie that one up. In the other game, it is still 0-0 between Seahawks and Cardinals, but it is Seattle marching into Arizona territory. So, too early to say whether it's good news or not for the Saints. Obviously, they still need quite a bit of help. If you want to look at this from a betting perspective, from a probabilities perspective, the Seahawks and Packers were both 3-point favorites. And if let's say you parlayed the two underdogs, which is basically what the Saints need to have happen, is both underdogs win, you'd get plus 422 odds at Caesars Sportsbook. That equates to about a 19% probability is what the sportsbooks say that both the Cardinals and the Bears win. So about a 1 in 5 chance for the Saints. They had about a 1 in 3 chance or maybe a 30% chance coming in to today, according to the New York Times simulator. I think the Athletic had them at like 24%. So it's gotten a little bit worse even with the Saints win because the Bucs able to win, and now you need help from 2 different sources. So again, it looks like the Packers are going to be forced to try a field goal, and they missed it in Chicago. So the Bears still have a 3-0 lead in that one late in the first quarter and got the ball back. But the Seahawks now in the Cardinals red zone. So, it's still early, still first quarter in both of those games. But as of right now, the Saints getting a little bit of help from the Bears, not yet from the Cardinals. So it's the Packers who control their own destiny. If they win, they're in. If they should lose, the Seahawks are the next team in line. And if they both lose, then it's the Saints who are in line. The Saints, with their win, by the way, today, eliminated the Falcons. They also eliminated the Minnesota Vikings, who were losing at the time anyway. But the Saints did eliminate the Vikings with their victory. So it's down to just those 3 teams, Saints, Seahawks, and Packers, for the final wild card spot in the NFC. Actually, right now we could show those wild card standings, Zoe. And right. The Saints are technically in that 7 spot right now at 9-8 because the Packers and Seahawks, both 8-8, haven't played yet. But if either one of them wins, they also win the tiebreaker over the Saints and would get the 7 spot. So the Saints still need that help. Too little, too late, I think, is kind of the theme of the day, at least one of the themes of the day. A lot of positives to take from what the Saints did today, what they did last week in Tampa Bay. And even, you go back 3 weeks to a pretty comprehensive victory over the New York Giants. They looked pretty good. In between, of course, they went to L.A., got beat by the Rams, and that ultimately looks like it'll be the game that keeps them out of the playoffs. Win 4 out of their last 5 after the loss in Atlanta, after the loss home to Detroit. That was a 3-game losing streak. But they needed to win all 5 of those games. So we'll focus on today's game for just a little while. Game actually started with the Saints punting and the Falcons going right down the field. A 56-yard pass from Desmond Ridder to Scotty Miller, he went in motion, and Alontae Taylor failed to pick him up on the play, and so he got left wide open, a coverage bust on the right sideline, and makes a catch. Jordan Howden was able to track him down right behind where I am, about the 19-yard line, and forced the Falcons to work from there, but they did ultimately get a touchdown pass from Desmond Ridder to Jonnu Smith to take a 7-0 lead. Saints answered right back, went right down the field, a 75-yard drive. That was capitalized by a Derek Carr to A.T. Perry touchdown pass. I believe 18 yards on that one on a fade route. And the Saints tied the game at 7. See some comments asking about the late touchdown for the Saints. So let's skip ahead to that just for a second. Saints were up 41-17. Falcons have their backup, who's really their third-string quarterback in the game because Taylor Heineke was injured So Desmond Ridder, they benched him, went to their third-string quarterback. Look, we're live. I can't even think of the kid's name right now. He played at Toledo. I do remember looking that up because I did not know who he was. But he threw an interception to Tyrann Mathieu, who had his third interception of the year against the Falcons, by the way. And Tyrann Mathieu couldn't quite find the speed to finish that pick six. He's tackled at the 1 yard line. There's like a minute and 15 seconds left in the game. Falcons had some timeouts, but look, they weren't going to call them. The Saints are winning 41-17. The Saints could have knelt on that. They come out in victory formation with Jameis Winston at quarterback and hand the ball off to Jamal Williams out of victory formation. He scores a touchdown, and the Saints kind of pour it on their rivals. So Arthur Smith, the Falcons coach, had some choice words for Dennis Allen and the Saints coaching staff after the game. There might have been one that started with an F. I won't say it, but you could lip read for yourself on the CBS broadcast. He was not happy with the Saints coaching staff. And by the way, the Saints press conference with Dennis Allen postgame started with Dennis Allen apologizing for that. I think he felt bad. He realized he didn't need to do that, and he said we should have kneeled down at the end of the game there. I don't know. It's a rivalry. I could go either way on that. I don't mind a kneel down. I also think if you don't want that to happen to you, then get out there and stop it. Then don't throw the interception late. I mean, I don't know what to say. This is professional sports. So, like let's not treat anybody with kid gloves here. This is professional sports. Look, chances are Arthur Smith, who was kind of riding high after the Falcons beat the Saints in Atlanta the Sunday after Thanksgiving, saying it was the biggest win of his career. It could define his legacy, all this kind of stuff. Like, life comes at you fast, man. He's 6 weeks later. The guy lost 48-17 in a must-win game after they lost to the Carolina Panthers, after they lost to the Chicago Bears last week. Like, just a terrible start or terrible finish to the season for the Falcons. Arthur Smith very well might have gotten himself fired today. There was a report from Ian Rappaport of NFL Network this morning saying that the Falcons are one of the teams interested in Bill Belichick. Should Bill Belichick leave the New England Patriots? So could the Falcons have a new quarterback, a new coach in town next year? Very, very likely could happen. It could be that fourth quarter that kind of turned a 31-17 game into a 48-17 game. That could easily be the straw that broke Arthur Smith's back after just a really poor December from his team. So, yeah, interesting scenario there at the end of the game. I'm curious to talk to our guys about that, what Luke and Matt and Rod and Jeff have to say about the end-of-game scenario and Arthur Smith screaming, cursing at the Saints coaching staff. Of course, the Falcons have a lot of former Saints coaches on their staff, not Arthur Smith, but they do have Ryan Nielsen, defensive coordinator. I think Chris Richard, a lot of players. Caden Ellis, the linebacker, left this game hurt. David Onyemata, a lot of former Saints on that Falcons defense, both on the field and on the sideline. And so there may have been some hurt feelings there. I think there were some hurt feelings there. And Dennis Allen did apologize after the game. So, look, bottom line is the Saints get it done, 48-17. They talked all week about taking care of their own business. They were able to do that. They were not able to get the help that they needed. And so the Saints win it 48-17. We have Rod Walker here, and Rod will pick up the mic. He's straight from the Saints press conference locker rooms. Rod, Saints win it 48-17. I mean, I think first and foremost, we got to give them their credit. They took care of business today.
Yeah, and I think obviously they took care of their business, but I thought Derek Carr had one of his better games. I think we may have said that last week. I mean, this is a team that played better down the stretch, won 4 out of 5. Obviously, we probably didn't think too much of the win over the Giants and
Carolina.
But I mean, these last 2 wins were over solid teams that were, right around 500. And obviously, these are 2 teams that had beaten the Saints earlier this season. So they avenged those 2 losses, put together a really dominant performance today. First time they scored this many points since the Alvin Kamara Christmas Day game in 2020. Wow. So yeah. Impressive. I mean, 48 points is a lot of points.
The great irony is the Saints, I think, objectively looked like a playoff team these last 2 weeks, double-digit wins over division rivals. But the great irony is they're not going to get in unless they get some significant help here from Arizona and Chicago.
Yeah, they need some help this afternoon. Talked to some of the guys in the locker room. There was Jamal Williams who said, hey, I'm not going to even watch those games. DeMario said, he's going to be watching. That this is, the Saints finished 9-8. This is who they are, and they need help. And if they're taking care of business in the season, you always think back to the Green Bay game. That's the one that you really think got away. That's one of the teams that they need to lose today. So But it is what it is, and they have to just wait it out.
Your feeling about the touchdown at the end of the game, we were just talking about that. I know Dennis Allen started his press conference apologizing to the Falcons coaching staff for that. It's a rivalry game. If you don't want it, stop it, that sort of thing. But at the same time, I think the Saints felt bad about that.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in the locker room actually asking about that. And I actually missed the play because when they lined up, it looked like
they were in victory formation. Yeah.
So I just kind of put my head down, just thinking they were taking the knee and the clock's running out. And the next thing I know, Jamal Williams is in the end zone. But I talked to Jamal, talked to Cesar Ruiz, talked to Jameis Winston, and he said the team just basically decided amongst themselves in the huddle that they wanted to get Jamal a touchdown. This guy had 17 touchdowns last year in Detroit, led the league in rushing touchdowns, didn't have one at all this season, and they were determined to get him one. And Cesar Ruiz, he said, I know there's going to be some heat for this, or basically said that if there's some heat for it, put it on the offensive line. We wanted to get Jamal a touchdown. We did not want to go home without him getting a touchdown his first season in New Orleans after what he had accomplished last season. So it was definitely the team's decision, and Jameis said they all just kind of decided in the huddle. And I guess Jameis, the ultimate decision probably falls on him because he's the quarterback. I mean, he could have kneeled down. He could have taken a knee, but they had decided to do that, and it was mostly the linemen, I think, just based on what we heard in the locker room. And I guess Jameis wasn't going to go against what they said, and they wanted to get Jamal a touchdown. So,
yeah, so it's teammates sticking up for a teammate, and maybe I don't think that one touchdown will cost Arthur Smith his job, but 48-17 loss in a must-win game certainly doesn't look good for him.
He wasn't happy about it. I don't know if you saw did you see the post-game?
Yeah, there was a couple of choice words exchanged.
Yeah, and I actually I sit by Luke in the press box, and right before as soon as the clock hit 0, I said, we probably want to watch this post-game handshake, and there really wasn't one. I mean, Arthur Smith sort of like stood back, and, he was kind of saying something to Dennis Allen. And I think Dennis was trying to explain to him that, hey, that wasn't on me, but I mean, I don't think a coach is going to believe that, So,
and ultimately, the head coach is responsible
for
what his team does. And so, speaking of that, Dennis Allen does get his first winning season as a coach. They're 9-8. Whether they make the playoffs or not, they do finish 4-1, as you mentioned. Is the overriding feeling for this season too little, too late, or this was a step in the right direction? I mean, it still feels like a missed opportunity to me. In a lot of ways.
I think it's definitely too little, too late. But I do think that Derek Carr, I don't know if he's silenced all the critics, but I think what you saw from him at the end of the season is a lot what people expected to see the whole season, and they didn't, unfortunately. But I do think there's a little bit more optimism around him. I do think the receiving core that 2 years ago, I mean, we talked about this receiving core and how it was Michael Thomas and nobody else. And now all of a sudden you got 2 second-year guys in Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and a rookie in A.T. Perry who played really, really well today. I mean, they combined for 4 touchdowns. So, I think there's some reasons to be optimistic, I guess. I think they did some things that are trending in the right direction. It just happened later in the season than anybody thought it would happen.
I will say this. A month ago, we were standing here talking after the loss to Detroit. The Saints are 5-7. And at that time, their rookie class kind of looked like a bust. Brian Brzee had shown a couple of flashes, but hadn't done much lately at that time. He gets a couple sacks down the stretch. A.T. Perry, as you mentioned, has 2 touchdown catches today. Really flashed well in this last month without Michael Thomas in the lineup. Jordan Howden gets a lot of playing time in the secondary. And then Kendra Miller today comes back from injury and leads the Saints in rushing, 73 yards and a touchdown. So you may have something in that 2023 rookie class.
I thought Kendra was really impressive. He was a guy that just season's been riddled with injuries throughout and his rookie season. So we didn't really know what he could do. I mean, we saw flashes here, but today I thought he was really solid. It wasn't like garbage time minutes. I mean, you knew that Kamara wasn't playing and he was going to kind of have to be, the man along with Jamal Williams. And I thought Kendra held up really well today.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Quick scoreboard update. It looks like the Bears are still beating the Packers 3-0, but it is the Seahawks up 3-0 on the Cardinals and with the ball back. So Saints getting a little bit of help in one game, not the other. Still very early in those games, but some scoreboard watching going on. I kind of get the feeling, and you were in the locker room, but from this Saints team that if they get in, they could cause problems for somebody. Now it looks like it'd be a matchup with Dallas, which is not a good matchup for the Saints, but this team is kind of peaking at the right time if they could get in.
Yeah, it's definitely peaking at the right time. I mean, going to Dallas, Dallas has played really well at home. That would be a tough matchup for the Saints or anybody probably, Ideally, I think if the Saints could have won his division, playing like they're playing now, and got Philadelphia here in the Dome next Saturday, Sunday, Monday, whenever it would have been. You probably like your chances better in there. I mean, I think the Saints are probably a 7-point underdog against the Cowboys if they go. I don't know.
I would think at least, yeah. I mean, maybe even a little more than that.
Yeah, so it'll be a tough matchup. But if this team can somehow get lucky this afternoon and get the 2 wins they need, I mean, you know, who knows? They are playing their best football right now, which sometimes that'll help you in the playoffs. It can, you know, those kind of teams make runs in the playoffs sometimes. They're playing well at the right time.
Yeah, we talked about Derek Carr playing well, the receivers playing very well behind him. On the defensive side, a couple of huge busts early leads to 2 Falcons touchdowns. That was the sort of thing that early in the season I think might have cost the Saints games because they just weren't scoring enough points to overcome that. Today, when the defense turned it around, and they did, it turned into a blowout. Yeah,
and it was kind of weird because, you know, all week long we talked about the Falcons running game. I think in the first half they may have had 20, 30 yards rushing and all these passing yards, and obviously 2 of them came on the 2 big plays, the busted coverages, and but the Saints overcame it. And like you said, I mean, this is a team that, you know, I was a little worried when the Falcons went up 14-7. I was like, this might be it, but the Saints stuck with it. The defense finally got rolling in the second half, and the Falcons didn't have any answers for it.
Yeah. Let's say the Saints season does end today, and if not, like you said, they'll probably be big underdogs in Dallas. It likely ends next week. Rod, what kind of changes do you see coming in this offseason?
I think you have to, and I know you don't make changes just to appease the fan base, but I do think there are some things that have to be done differently. I think Dennis Allen's pretty safe. I mean, he went 9-8, got his first winning season. I think you saw so much promise from these young guys. I mean, I think that's really good for this team. But I think, you know, some of those veteran players may not be around next season. And I do think, man, you know, Pete Carmichael is a guy who I thought would be the guy that
seemed obvious as the fall guy. Yeah,
right,
really did.
And then here we are. His offense put up 48 points. So you're like, man. But I do think that they'll have to make some changes on the offensive staff. And I think it may be with him. And I don't know if you even get rid of Pete Carmichael, but I think you just give him a different role, let him be an advisor, whatever you want to call him, and analyst, whatever you want to call him, and maybe bring in some new blood on offense. But again, what we saw from Carr, who most of us thought was probably the biggest issue with this team, was Carr running the offense. I mean, these past few weeks, I mean, he's done. I thought he did well. Yeah, and if you look at Carr's contract situation, a big cap hit for next year, and even bigger if you were to release him, like there's just no doubt the Saints are not in a position where they're going to draft a quarterback and replace Derek Carr, anything like that, which is what a lot of the talk. I don't know that it was ever likely, but boy, people were screaming for it around Thanksgiving, and now I think it's been accepted. Like he's going to be the guy at least one more year. Yeah, I mean, it was about a month ago we were hearing boos in this building, and now all of a sudden we weren't, and I could just sort of tell that. I mean, the way the crowd reacted to this win today, I mean, they were kind of into it again, and
had the Who Dat chant going on.
Yeah, and I know it was against the Falcons, so that helps. I mean, which is why that last touchdown, people were like, "Okay, it's the Falcons. Let's score again if we can. Let's go for 2 after this touchdown and make this 49 points." But so I thought today the Dome was almost. It wasn't back to normal, but I mean, it was. You know, fans
wasn't quite full, but yeah, it was. Yeah. It felt like normal, and I think. You know, if you look at Derek Carr's last month of the season, starting with the Detroit game, and so it's not exactly cherry picking because you're including the Detroit game, you're including the Carolina game, which wasn't very good. I think he had 15 touchdown passes and only 3 interceptions in those last 6 games. So,
yeah, I mean, he definitely figured it out. And this is a game, you know, we all kind of talked about how this game, had they not beat the Bucs last week, we talked about how bad this place was going to be today, and it wasn't because they took care of business last week, and then they came here today and took care of business with the season on the line pretty much. And I mean, now they still have a chance, at least for the next two and a half hours.
Next 2.5 hours. Saints beat the Falcons 48-17. They do not get the help they need from Charlotte, where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers beat the Carolina Panthers 9-0. So they wait on wildcard help. That's Rod Walker. We'll let him get to work, Times-Picayune columnist, and wait and see what happens. We'll be right back on the Saints Insider Postgame Show with more after this.
We are Tulane doctors. Physicians and scientists working side by side to advance academic medicine. We give our community access to the best possible medical remedies, developing state-of-the-art treatments to improve quality of life. address public health crises, and cure disease. All in passionate pursuit of our mission to provide inspired patient care for generations to come. Tulane Doctors. The future of medicine is here.
The Times-Picayune always gets it right. Jay's on top.
Not quite. It says here the Crusaders are the best.
I think you mean the Greenies, buddy. These sports writers know what's up.
At least you're wearing the right colors, but we know why people read the paper. The one thing we can all agree on, we trust the Times-Picayune.
Subscribe today. Read it today. Trust it today. The Times-Picayune.
You're never gonna make the front page wearing that.
Welcome back to the Saints Insider Postgame Show. Zach Ewing live from the Caesars Superdome. My thanks to Rod Walker for stopping by. We'll have Jeff Duncan, Luke Johnson, Matthew Parrish here momentarily, still listening to, I believe, the Derek Carr press conference going on underneath the dome. Saints beat the Falcons 48-17. Scoreboard update from the wild card games. Right now it's still 3-0 Bears, but the Green Bay Packers in the red zone, and 3-0 Seahawks. The Cardinals have the ball. That game has more time left. That one's still in the final minute of the first quarter. Chicago-Green Bay is now almost midway through the second quarter, and the Packers in the Chicago red zone looking to at least tie that game. They did miss I think they missed a field goal earlier. Just looking at scores, y'all may know better than I do. But as of right now, the Saints, if those results both held, it would be the Seattle Seahawks taking that number 7 seed and going to play Dallas in the first round. I believe it's, Dallas and Washington tied 7-7. I'll tell you what. So Dallas needs to win to secure that number 2 seed. So we're not sure of anything just yet. What we are sure of is that the Saints finished this game with a 48-17 victory, finished the season at 9-8. I was kind of going through the play-by-play when Rod stepped by just a little bit. We'll continue that here. It was 7-7 after the Derek Carr to A.T. Perry touchdown pass in the first quarter. Falcons struck right back on the second play of the next drive. Desmond Ridder, I think it was a wheel route to Bijan Robinson. He snuck out of the backfield, didn't see the exact route. But he pops open, and Alontae Taylor kind of gambled and lost, tried to undercut the route. I think he knew he was beat. Maybe he should have let Robinson catch it, go tackle him for a 15-yard gain or something. Instead, he tries to undercut the route and knock the pass away. He missed, and Bijan Robinson had nothing but green turf in front of him, ran 71 yards for a touchdown that put the Falcons up 14-7. Just 2 pretty massive coverage busts in that first quarter for the Saints defense. And it looked like they were going to have their hands full all day long with this Falcons offense. But the Saints offense answered yet again, going down the field again for a touchdown. Key plays on this one, Derek Carr hit Juwan Johnson to convert a 4th and 2. And then the Saints get inside the 10, and it was Kendra Miller with his first career touchdown, a play that was reviewed and changed to a touchdown. He reached the ball across the goal line kind of from his back just before it hit the turf for the touchdown to tie the game up at 14. That score held up until late in the first half. The Saints, I think if there's one kind of coaching point you could nitpick, they mismanaged the clock a little bit. They had punted on 4th down the drive before and pinned the Falcons deep, got the ball back, got a shanked punt, got the ball back at the Falcons 36. It was like 2 minutes and 24 seconds left. Falcons had all 3 timeouts. Saints had a couple of timeouts. So they had plenty of time, had the 2-minute warning, obviously. Could have taken a lot of time off the clock. Instead, they kind of went into a hurry-up situation. The drive ends up stalling inside the 10, and the Saints kick a field goal, get a Blake Grupe field goal to take a 17-14 lead, but they left the Falcons 56 seconds and a couple of timeouts. And so Desmond Ridder, who was red hot in the first half, able to march the Falcons down to the other end and pick up a short field goal from Younghoe Koo that tied the game 17-17 at halftime. So Saints kind of, they did the right thing, got the stop on defense, get the good field position, kind of mismanaged the clock there at the end of the first half. They go into the locker room tied, but you think, man, they maybe should be better than that right now. It's hard to say. 17-17, and the Falcons get the ball first in the second half. None of that ended up mattering. First series of the second half, Desmond Ridder does the thing that he does at least once a game where he forgets what color uniform his team is wearing, threw the ball right to Alontae Taylor. So Alontae Taylor, who had been burned a couple times in the first half, he actually got taken off the field for a series or two in favor of Ugo Amadi, or in favor of Isaac Yiadom, excuse me. Then he gets the interception, returns it all the way down to the 25. 2 plays later, Derek Carr to Chris Olave, really the highlight of the game. Chris Olave reaches over the D-back, kind of bats the ball up to himself and catches it in the back of the end. Just an unbelievable play. We have the highlight up on NOLA.com/Saints. If you have not seen it, go check that out. Pretty amazing play from Chris Olave. Gives the Saints a 24-17 lead. They force a punt, go right back to work. This time it was Derek Carr to Rashid Shaheed on a 39-yard touchdown pass back of the end zone. Another really nice catch. Derek Carr played very well. He got some big-time help from his receivers today, too. He was putting the ball in good places. Receivers were making plays. It was just good all around for the offense. The running game was humming, over 100 yards rushing, 73 from Kendra Miller. Taysom Hill, I think, had 40 or 50. Jamal Williams got his touchdown at the end. So, obviously, a really good day for the offense. That makes it 31-17. And really, the Falcons' kind of last gasp. Late in the third quarter, they go on a nice drive and get all the way down to the Saints' 1-yard line. But on 3rd and goal, it was Carl Granderson who stuffs Cordero Patterson, for a yard loss to bring up 4th and goal. Falcons decide to throw on 4th down, and Ugo Amadi bats the ball away before Bijan Robinson could catch it in the left side of the end zone. Saints get the ball back. They're backed up at their own 2, but on 3rd and 8 from the 4, Carr throws up another deep one. A.T. Perry makes his own kind of circus catch. It's like a 25-yard gain. Actually, I think 29-yard gain out to the 33. That was right at the end of the third quarter. And at that point, look, the Saints have the 31-17 lead. They spent the first 5 minutes of the fourth quarter kind of grinding out the rest of a drive that ends in another Blake Grupe field goal, makes it 34-17. And after that, it was just kind of icing on the cake. They get 2 more touchdowns, both off of turnovers. A bad snap recovered by Peyton Turner. Shout out to Peyton Turner, who was hurt all year long and gets back in. He was hurt in the very first game of the year against Tennessee. He comes back in the very last game of the year here against Atlanta, recovered that fumbled snap. That set up a second Derek Carr to A.T. Perry touchdown pass. So if you're counting, that's 4 touchdowns for Derek Carr. First time he's done that in a Saints uniform. And that made it 41-17. And then, of course, we talked about the Tyrann Mathieu interception, the near pick 6. He goes down to the 1-yard line. And apparently, according to Rod Walker, the offense kind of takes it upon itself to punch that in for the 48-17 victory. So that's the way it went down. Got the rest of the crew here. And we'll start. Who's starting? Luke? Luke Johnson is here, fresh from the Saints locker room and press conferences. Luke, welcome in. Saints Insider Postgame Show. 48-17 Saints. Team looked like a playoff team, even if it's not going to the playoffs.
Yeah, sure did. Look, I feel like we've said this a lot over the last 4 or 5 weeks, but that was clearly the best game of the season for them. Got off to a terrible start, and they righted the ship quickly. And they thoroughly dominated that second half of that game. All phases of that team were very sharp. Derek Carr easily had his best game as a Saint. Kendra Miller easily his best game as a Saint. Defense forced a bunch of turnovers in the second half. They looked very, very good against. The Falcons are not a good football team, but they're not a bad football team, and they made them look bad today.
You know what else looks bad is Jeff Duncan photo bombs. Just walked right behind us.
It's a classic Duncan move.
Could have gone the other way. He could have gone the other way.
Could have gone the other way. There's plenty of room behind the camera.
Yeah. Well,
Jeff avoided
that. We'll have to question Jeff about that. We asked Rod about it, and he kind of told us the players did this on their own, I guess. But the touchdown at the end of the game kind of ratchets this rivalry up one more notch.
Yeah, it sure does. And I think they faced a lot of valid questions about that afterwards. Their coach told them to do something. They were like, you know what, we're going to do our own thing. The explanation that I got from multiple players was that Jamal Williams is one of the favorite guys on the team. Everybody loves Jamal Williams. Everybody thinks that he has played like a really thankless role for the team this year. Done a lot of the dirty work and hasn't had a lot of opportunities to get his. So they took matters in their own hands and got him his first rushing touchdown of the year. One of the players expressed some regret that they did it out of the victory formation. But that was the play that was called. So that was the personnel they had in there. They couldn't really just make up the formation on the field. But everything I heard about that was just a bunch of players saying, "Look, this was all 11 guys in the huddle, all agreeing that this is what we're going to do." So obviously the Falcons took exception to that. I get that. Dennis Allen didn't like it, but the players did their own thing.
Yeah, and ultimately the Saints dominated this game either way. We don't want to take the focus too much off of that. I guess the problem is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did not help them out at the end of the season as well, and the Saints end up second fiddle in the NFC South. How do you ultimately handicap this season? I know it's only been over here for an hour, but just is it too little too late, or is this team now trending in the right direction again? I mean, how do you –
I don't know. It's really tough to say. I think I'll say this. I think I'm really encouraged by the way Derek Carr finished the season. 12 touchdowns, 1 interception in his last 4 games. That's really good, no matter who you are. Yeah, he was efficient in all those games. You saw what he can do when he gets a little time from the pass protection. He's really good. I mean, he was carving people up. So that is encouraging because obviously you're not going to go anywhere in the NFL unless you have good to great quarterback play. So really encouraging. But like outside of that, I mean, I don't think any of the stuff that we've been talking about this year is changing. We're an aging roster with a lot of financial commitments tied up to players who are in their 30s, and tied up to players who have multiple void years at the end of their contracts. It's going to take a really good draft class and some really shrewd moves for this team to improve, because things are going to get harder next season for sure. There's no doubt about it. They played one of the worst schedules in NFL history this year, and they went 9-8. So they got to have a lot of things go right to counteract some of the things that are working against them right now.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, just given the schedule, they could be a better team next year and be in the same situation. Just 9-8 against this schedule is not 9-8 against another schedule. So I do think one thing, mentioned this to Rod, a month ago we stood here after they lost to Detroit. This rookie class looked like a bust. But Brian Brzee kind of picks it back up at the end of the year, gets a couple of sacks. A.T. Perry looks like they found something there. Jordan Howden's on the field. Kendra Miller looked good today. Maybe something to build on in this draft class.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, we've been saying a lot about Kendra Miller this season. You could see the burst and the explosiveness. It's just he never had an opportunity to show it consistently. And today, I mean, he looked like the player we all thought they were getting today. So I think he has potential to be a very, very good NFL player if he can stay healthy. It's a big deal because this year he just it could not get on the field. And I think you're right about A.T. Perry. I mean, maybe his role is never going to be like a number 1 or number 2 wideout.
Yeah.
But he is definitely a guy you can put on the field and trust to make plays. He was going up and mossing dudes today, and he's done that a lot over the course of his short career. And this was a guy who was inactive for the first 7 weeks of the season, something like that. And he's almost, I think he's up there with the team leading touchdown grabs. So they've got some players. I think the book is still, we still remain. There's a lot that remains to be seen about Nick Saldivari. Jake Haener, obviously we didn't see on the field this year. We only saw him in the preseason. But they have some players. They need more of it. They need another draft class with impact players.
Yeah, for sure. It seemed obvious, and we'll end with this, Luke. It seemed obvious a month or even 2 weeks ago that changes were inevitably coming to this team. Do you still feel that way after 2 good performances?
I still feel that way. I do. Because, I mean, they finished strong, but, I think we've seen this offense in particular just, it's plateaued. I just think that it needs some new, fresh ideas. Because I don't think they can look at what's happened the last 2 seasons and feel like that's the direction they want to head. I would still expect some changes on this staff because Dennis Allen I think is 100% safe for the 2024 season, but it's like he's got a lot on the line next year. I don't think he can just kind of remain with the status quo to just feel comfortable going into 2025 offseason.
Yeah, Dennis Allen, his first winning season as a head coach, but still a lot of questions and uncertainty going forward. But hey, last year at time the Saints were boring. They were not boring.
Yeah. Well, and who knows too? I mean they could somehow sneak in the playoffs. I don't know what the afternoon games are looking like right now. They could get in and maybe they get hot, and you never know. And maybe all this conversation is going to be moot in week or 2 weeks. But I just think that's kind of where they're at right now.
Waiting for a scoreboard update. Okay, we've got Seattle 3, Arizona 3. The Packers lead the Bears 7-3, but it is Chicago in the red zone. So, games in the second quarter both still kind of up in the air.
Yep.
He's Luke Johnson. We'll let him get to work and bring on Matthew Paris here on the Saints Insider Postgame Show, talking live from the Caesars Superdome after the Saints. Another photo bomb after the Saints beat the Atlanta Falcons 48-17. Welcome in Matt Paris. Matt, just dominance. Wait a minute. Hold on. Everybody, make a window. There's Luke. Jeff Duncan starting a trend here on the Saints Insider Postgame Show. Just pure dominance from the Saints today.
It really was. I mean, this was not the team that I had been covering for the first,
8 weeks,
of the season. So very surprising in the sense that it all came together. But, you still have to think back to earlier in the season and that they couldn't get this done. And we'll see what their playoff fate is. But, they didn't show the Tampa Bay score at all here today on the Jumbotron. And if they would have, I think it would have killed the mood because this place was rocking, with a performance like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I'd forgotten to mention that. But even as the Saints on kind of these corner ribbon scoreboards have there goes Jeff again. They have out of town scores rotating through, and there was only 5 other noon games, fewer than usual because of the Week 18 situation, and they only showed 4 of the other scores. They did not show the Tampa Bay Carolina score at all, and I think ultimately probably a good move. Like you have to take care of your own business before you can worry about anything else.
If there was a time to show it, would have been on that 4th and goal stop in the third quarter. It cuts to Carolina winning. The place erupts, but Carolina wasn't winning, and you didn't want to kill the mood. So, there was a perfect time in the game to actually show it, but, it had to play their way, and it didn't.
Yeah. Just all around good performances from this team. I think ultimately, I want to talk about Derek Carr and his numbers, but I thought his receiving core made him look even, and he was good, but made him look even better than he was today.
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about the improvement in the red zone, you have to really give credit to the receivers. I mean, they've been able to make these tight, contested catches. What was impressive today is those tight, contested catches didn't necessarily come in the red zone. They came on a 26-yard bomb to Chris Olave, that 39-yard strike to Rashid Shaheed. These were really tight, contested catches, and what's nice about the Saints receiving core is they all kind of have a different skill set, Shaheed's the speed guy, Olave is kind of your all-around superstar, and then A.T. Perry is kind of the contested catch, tall.
He'll high point you, and
So.
Or as Luke said, he'll moss you. I don't know that A.T. Perry is Randy Moss, but he looked like him a couple times today.
Sure.
I don't know, and then you have Carr who, and maybe part of this is learning to trust those guys and say, hey, if it's one-on-one, that guy's open. Whereas early in the season, he would check that pass down. I don't know if that's part of it or not.
Well, I think it's interesting, when we talk about Carr's accuracy, sometimes it is brought up as a negative of he's taking the check down, but I actually think it really helps him in games like this. It keeps them on schedule. He led a 16-play drive at one point early on in the game after Tampa had scored that, I think it was 77-yard touchdown to Bijan Robinson. It was just
Atlanta.
Yeah, Atlanta. Yeah, sorry. And so, keeping them on schedule, he's been the most accurate quarterback the second half of the season, ever really since week 9. I think he's completing 72% of his passes. And he had an amusing anecdote in the post-game press conference about how during practice with DJ Williams, one of their quarterbacks coaches, he's been doing this accuracy drill that he used to run with his dad where Williams just kind of, sprints across the field and Carr just hits him repeatedly and kind of wears his coaches out. But I do think it's helped him kind of just stay sharp, stay in a rhythm throughout the second half of the season. And, outside the Los Angeles game to start that, I think he's played pretty well down the stretch, at least the last 4 of this 4 or 5 stretch that they've had.
Yeah. And we were talking about it. I mean, there's still games going on, obviously, although none of them have huge scores. I'm just not looking at stats, but it's a pretty good chance Derek Carr is your NFC Player of the Week this week. 22 of 28, I think 244 yards and 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. And you could actually make an argument for him for Player of the Month in December. He's had 15 touchdowns, 3 interceptions since the Detroit game. Luke mentioned this, 12 touchdowns, 1 interception in the last 4 games of the season. If you can't do this, but if you could replicate that 4 games, 4 separate times, those are MVP numbers. I mean, the guy's played really well.
And I think you have to kind of look at the circumstances around him too. Not only is his health getting better, but I thought the offensive line played much better down the stretch. It'll be interesting to see whether the Saints make offensive changes going here forward, because I think a lot of us expect him to, but also, you know, you look at the success he had in the second half of the season, it's how much is that tinkering with? I wonder if they do replace Pete Carmichael, do they try and find someone from that same system rather than, you know, scrap it and go to a completely new offense to try and replicate to what, you know, Derek Carr is comfortable with?
Yeah. Look, obviously the Saints playing well. It looks like it's going to be too little, too late. Seattle just scored a touchdown. They're up 10-3. Green Bay leads Chicago 7-6. So it's just still first half in those games, but neither one going the Saints' way right now. They need both of them to go their way to sneak into the playoffs. Right. You weren't here for the whole season, but there's an awful lot of coulda, woulda, shouldas. You were here for the first Atlanta game, which I think is one of them. 5 red zone trips. Just don't score any touchdowns. Give up a touchdown in the red zone instead. The Green Bay game at the beginning of the year, up 17-0. That's the obvious one. End up losing 18-17. So I think if you have to write the epitaph of this Saints team today, and it looks like that is what's going to happen, I mean, I think that's it. It's just came up a little bit short.
Yeah, I mean, Alvin Kamara after the first Atlanta game called them consistently inconsistent. You know, that's really the phrase that's carried with them all year. I think even when they've put it together, you could point to that of where has this team been? Why couldn't they do that all along? And you know, they got on track and played some good football, but also you have to look at the schedule, and this was a cakewalk schedule, and you know it's going to be much tougher next year.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And on that note, we do have the Saints' last 3 opponents confirmed. They finished second in their division, so they'll face the other second place teams, Cleveland Browns and LA Rams here in the Dome, and then they'll be at the Green Bay Packers yet again next year. Those are the final 3 opponents, along with the ones that were already set. So he's Matthew Paris, beat writer for the Times-Picayune for the Saints, and you can read his game story on NOLA.com/Saints. We'll make our last handoff of the year here and let Jeff Duncan come in. I shouldn't say that. There could be one in Dallas or Philly or somewhere next week. Jeff, I appreciate you making a cameo earlier in the.
Do my best.
Yeah, you're the one everybody's here to see. What's your main takeaway from that game?
Well, I mean, it's a great way to finish the season if it is indeed the last game of the year. Probably the best performance we've seen all year, certainly from the offense. I think there's reason to be encouraged about what we saw from Derek Carr. I think he's clearly playing his best football of the year. And as Dennis Allen said in there, when your quarterback plays well in this league, your team usually plays well. And I think we saw that today. And I think they found something with these 3 young receivers, A.T. Perry playing big today, Rashid Shaheed, and Chris Olave. There's reason to be encouraged about the future of that passing attack, which looked so inconsistent earlier in the year and really held this team back in the first half of the season. And unfortunately, it looks like it's going to be a little too late for this team, but you can see the potential there. And I do think, my column tomorrow is going to be about how this team did kind of coalesce down the stretch. And I think it is reflective of Dennis Allen's grip on the team. I mean, it was looking pretty bleak there going into the last 5 games of the season. It could have splintered the locker room, and instead the team kind of came together. And that doesn't happen unless you respect the head coach and the coaching staff, and the leaders on the team don't kind of gel. And so, I know a lot of people wanted changes, and certainly there are going to be some changes with this team, but I don't think we're going to see a change at head coach, especially not after this performance today.
Yeah. To Dennis Allen's credit, the 4 out of 5. And we sat here and said on one of our Saints Insider podcasts, I think it's, New York Times Simulator or whatever you look at, if the Saints could win 4 out of 5, their playoff chances were in the 80%. And they did that. It happened. Looks like it's going to fall in that 20% where they didn't get the help they needed. Tampa Bay able to beat Green Bay and Jacksonville back to back, which nobody saw coming, and just didn't work out for them. But I think clearly more positive feelings here in the Dome than there were a month ago.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it was getting pretty ugly there. And if they would have lost one of these other games and finished with a losing record, I think management and ownership would have had to seriously consider some more serious changes, including looking at the head coach. But I think just seeing the way the team responded to him says a lot. Now, they've got to tweak some things. They got to turn over the roster. There was a report today that had something that opened my eyes. It mentioned some cultural changes that need to be made and are being made. And that's code to me with some players. They need to change out some players. Now, so I think we're going to see some changes on this roster with maybe some big name players, some players that have been here a while that maybe we're not buying in. And I just think that we're in store for a lot of change this offseason.
I'm glad you brought that up. Jeff's column this morning, you can read it on NOLA.com/Saints, was suggesting that the Saints part ways with Michael Thomas, which I don't think is a big surprise given his contract situation. He hasn't been on the field. But the other one you brought up was Marshawn Lattimore. And I think we could maybe even throw Alvin Kamara in that mix. Expensive veterans. I don't want to pinpoint any of these guys as necessarily the cultural problem you're talking about, but these are the types of names that could be moving on.
Well, and look, both those guys, I think, will be talked about by the front office, by the coaching staff. They're both assets. And this team right now, in trying to move forward, is going to have assets if they want to get younger. And let's face it, they're in cap hell again. They have a lot of salary cap issues. They've got to shed cap space. And at the expense of doing that, it might cost them some key players, like an Alvin Kamara. As we saw Kendre Miller today, you can see the potential in him. They drafted him with that potential in mind. And this is what happens in the NFL. Derek Carr just talked about it in the locker room. He goes, every year there's changes. We're going to see some changes to this roster. We're going to see some changes to the coaching staff. So I think it could be significant, and it could include players of that caliber. Look, the Saints just reworked Marshawn Lattimore's contract, including that option bonus, for a reason. That wasn't done, by happenstance. That was done with a purpose in mind.
Leaves the door open to trade him is what
correct.
You're
correct. So, and Marshawn Lattimore and his representation agreed to that. And so that says a lot as well. They didn't have to agree to that. So I do think it's a potential there. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but they're giving themselves some flexibility.
100%. And I do. You mentioned the Saints in cap hell. What circle of cap hell are they in now? It's at least the fifth circle, marching toward the seventh. I think it's been year after year.
Yeah, it's been part of the way they've done business here. And Mickey Loomis and Kai Harley are as good as it gets in managing the cap. They'll be fine. They'll get under the cap, but it could cost them some key players. I mean, we saw a couple of guys out here today for the Falcons, Caden Ellis and David Onyemata, that basically were cap casualties a year ago, then ended up on another roster. And I think that's going to happen again because of the way the Saints have restructured a lot of contracts. They don't have a lot of flexibility. And by moving some of these players, and look, it's tough for some of these guys, I think, especially guys that have been around the Drew Brees era, that have won at a very high level, and they're nearing the end of their careers, and they're seeing potentially a transition going on here. That's difficult for players who want to win another title. They want to play at that high level, and sometimes a change of scenery can do both sides good. Can help the player get to a place where maybe he can have a chance to win another ring, because it doesn't look like, even as encouraging as today was, as encouraging as the finish was, this team to me still feels like it's in transition to another place, and I'm not sure next year is going to be the year either.
Yeah, that's the danger, isn't it, in a hot finish like this? As much as you like to see the team play well, and as much as a performance like today's leaves fans wanting more, you also can't look at that and say, okay, everything's good again.
Right. And I don't think the Saints can delude themselves into thinking that. They can't sugarcoat things. They have to really peel back the layers of this team and have an unvarnished look and be honest with themselves of where they're at. And I do think that's been a problem for this front office at times. I think they're naturally optimistic, and I think they feel like they're closer. And I think Eric McCoy alluded to that a couple of weeks ago, where he said maybe we're not as close as we thought. I tend to agree with him there. But I do think the most encouraging thing for me, what I saw down the stretch, was Derek Carr's play, because I was having some serious concerns with where he was at, if he was on the downside of his career. And what I've seen the last couple of weeks, especially the last 2 weeks, I mean, he's playing the best football, and I can see the potential there with him. And when everything works well and he gets protection, we can see that he's got a big time ability to move this ball down the field and become the quarterback that he's being paid to be.
Yeah, explosive offense today. And you mentioned how close are the Saints to being title contenders. That's one question. We do know they were extremely close to getting into the playoffs this year. You can look back at all of these Jim Mora specials, the coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Right.
The Green Bay game is the obvious one, blowing a 17-0 lead in the fourth quarter. I think we sat on the postgame show that very day in September and said, this is the kind of game you're going to talk about at the end of the year. But also, they had many chances at the end of the game in Houston to win that game. Foster Moreau dropped a pass against Jacksonville at the end that could have tied or even won that game. The first meeting with Atlanta, all those red zone failures. I mean, there's just so many, and that's the NFL for you. I mean, that there are coulda, woulda, shouldas for every team. but this team just seemed like it had more than its share.
Yeah, and look, these last two games, the two teams they were contending in the division with, Tampa Bay and Atlanta, the Saints pretty much dominated both of them. So here at the end of the season, you can make a strong argument they're the best team in the division, and they might be home for the playoffs. And that's an indictment of what happened early in the season, whether it's the coaching staff, the leaders on the team, the execution of the quarterback, all those things probably led to it. But people can't be satisfied with missing the playoffs again because everyone expected this team to make the playoffs. And it's clearly good enough, as we saw today, even playing without Alvin Kamara, without Ryan Ramczyk, without Michael Thomas, without Marshawn Lattimore. They dominated a solid Falcons team today. So, someone has to answer for that. And that's what Mickey Loomis, Jeff Ireland, Kai Harley, the brain trust of this team, has got to sit down with Dennis Allen and see if they can get this team going in the right direction, because it's floundered now for 3 years around 500, and the expectations were much greater.
Yeah, that's the final word from the Saints Insider Postgame Show. Definitely the final time from the Superdome this year, because the Saints will not have a home playoff game no matter what. Probably for the final time as we look at scores one more time. We've got the Packers leading the Bears 7-6. That game has gotten to the half, and the Cardinals lining up for a field goal down 10-3 against Seattle at the 2-minute warning.
So still in it.
So
both teams still in it.
The games are not over, but the Saints do need both of them to go their way, and the teams they need to win are both losing right now. So it's getting more and more unlikely, but season's not over. Type performance that leaves you wanting more from the Saints, and ultimately maybe makes you that much more frustrated at how the season at large went. So our thanks to Tulane Doctors, our sponsor for our post-game coverage all year long. Also to Rod Walker, Luke Johnson, Matthew Parrish for stopping by, and Norman Bell, our man behind Zoe Collins,
Norman,
producing for us behind the scenes from home. And he's Jeff Duncan. I'm Zach Ewing. Thanks for watching the Saints Insider Postgame Show. By the way, we will be back regular Saints Insider podcast throughout the offseason. We'll come up with a schedule. We'll definitely do 2 of them this week, whether they're in the playoffs or not, and keep abreast of all the changes the Saints may or may not make. So with that, signing off one last time from the Superdome. Thanks for watching.